Jesus' name, amen. Dale?
We're going to start in 1 Timothy 3 today. After the passage, and we're going to read the passage on deacons here in just a second, but I think this is both a good reminder and a good place to start. Paul says in 1 Timothy 3:14, I'm writing these things to you in case I'm delayed and I'm not able to be there. And then here's this very significant phrase. He says, I want you to know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the pillar and the ground of the truth. And what we're looking at today, looking at deacons, is a part of, and obviously there's more instruction there, but a part of the instructions, this is how you conduct yourself in God's household. And there's a whole lesson on this, but just to make the comment, there are times where Paul will refer to the church as like a structure, like a temple. There's a sense that the church is like a bride, but there's also a sense where the church is a body. But one of his other favorite expressions is it's like a family. And the description is in the household of God, God being the head of the household, here's how we're to conduct ourselves. And today there are specific instructions that are given to deacons, and let's just start and read those starting in verse 8. After he's talked about bishops, overseers, then he says, deacons are to be men worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain. They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience, and they must first be tested, and then, if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. Most translations will say, in the same way their wives are to be women worthy of respect, not malicious talkers, but temperate and trustworthy. The deacon must be the husband of one wife, must manage his children and household well, and those who have served well gain an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith in Christ Jesus. There's not a lot of passages mentioned specifically about deacons, but one of the ones that we just mentioned is the very opening of the book of Philippians. And as Paul writes to the church in Philippi, Paul and Timothy, servants of Christ Jesus, to all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi with overseers and deacons. And in the same way last week, we looked at passages where there's a blending, a bringing together of the terms for elders, the terms for bishops or overseers, and the terms for shepherds. And we see that these three terms, and they're also called stewards, but these three terms are descriptive of the same men. But in a passage like it's just an opening in Philippians, not a lot said, not a lot of detail, but he just says we want to send greetings to all the saints and the overseers and deacons. And we get these little snapshots at different places through the New Testament. And what I think is significant about this is that at the church in Philippi, then there are men who are serving as the overseers, the bishops, and there are men serving as deacons. And this has become a part of the structure, a part of the pattern of the household of God. And as people were involved in the church, then this was the structure that the church took place. If you look at this term deacon, and we're going to look at it in some different ways today, the word deacon comes from the word diakonos, and you can hear deacon within the original word diakonos, and it has a wide range of meanings outside of just what our specific meanings are in terms of a church office. But terms like an assistant, terms like someone who is under supervision but who helps and contributes in a certain way. And there's always a sense, if I always think of this physically, there's a sense of blending and partnership. Our original men who were chosen earlier in Acts 6 are not specifically called deacons, but they to me are very much an example of what a deacon is. A deacon is someone who is asked to serve in a specific capacity. In the first century, there were, and we'll see these terms here later, there was a variety of people who served in a household. There's going to be slaves, there's going to be servants and other people. And in the same way that Jesus is going to emphasize, and we'll look at this verse later, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And so what I think of when I look at the deacons is that the deacons then are, thank you guys coming in. There's outlines on the back table and this other communion table if you run out. Glad you're here. And when you look at deacons in the same way that Jesus chooses to serve, then one of the things we're going to notice today is that when I look at the office of deacons, these are men who have been selected who choose to serve, and in this capacity of service, they're very much in the spirit and the ministry of Jesus. Jesus wasn't forced to, Jesus wasn't sold into slavery, and in fact, Philippians will say he emptied himself and became a servant. And when you look at, and I'm under Roman numeral 2 if you have the outline, deacons are going to be servants in the church in the same way that Jesus is a servant to all of mankind. Mark 10:45, and we'll see this again in a different way. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. We had a dear friend in Australia. He grew up in a totally dysfunctional family in the state of Washington. Don ended up being about 6'7", 6'8", and when he was in college, he was on the varsity basketball team. He was taking 17 hours of university work and working 35 hours a week in a grocery store. You just imagine 3 hours of basketball practice a day, 17 hours of classes, and working 35 hours a week. His family was so dysfunctional that in Washington, at the age of 10, he went in the backyard and kind of a part of an old house had fallen down. He made a structure with a floor, and for the time he was 10 until he left for college, he slept out in this tent in the backyard, even in the snow. His mom and dad just fussed and fought all the time and everything else. And he had a dog, and he said, I would much rather have been outside in the snow than inside with my folks. While he's working at this grocery store, he meets a lady from Arkansas who's a member of the church, and he's never been to church, ever. And he finally gets the nerve to ask her out, and like I said, he's this huge guy. And she had gotten in her car and rolled her window down. He said, I got on my knees, and he said the whole car was shaking by the time I finally asked her out, because he said I was just terrified. He said I had hold of the door and the car was shaking. And he said, would you like to go on a movie Saturday night? And she says, well, I'll go to a movie with you if you'll come to church with me on Sunday. And he said, what's that? She said, well, we sing hymns and stuff, and he wanted to go out with her, and so that was their first deal. And until he died, he could tell you the first songs that he heard, because he had never heard hymns before. He had never been to church. Ends up becoming a Christian. They moved to Australia in 1972, and they both lived there until they die. Don and Maxine are buried in Sydney. In the later years, and again, here's this 6'7", 6'8" guy, when he wasn't able to preach, Don said, every church service, regardless of what the subject and the topic is, I go to church to lay hands on people. which to him was a hug. And he said, there's 5 or 6 guys that every Sunday I want to give them a hug and say, I appreciate what you're doing as a father, on and on. And here's my point. We've all heard people say, I didn't get anything out of church today. What if you didn't come to get in the first place? What if your purpose in coming was to give? You're going to win every time that way, regardless of whether you got anything out of the lesson or not. And here's Jesus, the Son of Man, came not to be served. And it's important when people are looking for a new congregation to look at their family and where this fits and other stuff. And I use the term church shopping. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, all of us at some time or another have to do that. But one of the things that's amazing is that when people are church shopping and looking for a place where they can serve rather than be served, they're going to have a whole different experience there. And that's what I think of with deacons, is that deacons take the challenge and, in a sense, the example of Jesus. And since Jesus came to serve and not to have other people serve him, then to me the deacons in the church are very much the spirit of Jesus in the church today. Do you remember when John uses that wonderful expression, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us? Then that's what I think of our deacons. These are men who choose to take their time and their talents and their opportunities and to be a part of those who serve. And so we listed, and we just touched on these last week, and we'll do these very quickly, but there's some criteria that Paul gives for deacons. A deacon is to have experience in the Christian life. He is first to be proved. He has experience and ability. And he holds the mystery of the faith. He's faithful. And in the same way that last week the elder is not a novice, he's not a new Christian, then deacons in the same way are to be tested to some degree. And to me, a lot of the test is watching their lifestyle. And I think of this in the same way when we appoint elders. Rather than someone coming an elder and saying, you need to start looking after and shepherding the people, we need to find someone who's already been doing that before he becomes an elder. It's not like, oh, now that I'm an elder, I start doing A, B, and C, but I've never done this before. And to me, when we find men who are shepherds of the flock, they've been looking after, encouraging, and caring for people even before they officially became elders. Well, the same thing's with a deacon. You don't appoint a deacon, he says, oh, I need to start serving. You look for men who already have that quality and that characteristic even before they're chosen to be deacons. Character and reputation, worthy of respect, dignified, blameless, of good report, full of the Spirit. And sometimes in Church of Christ we don't talk about this a lot, but I look at those wonderful passages in Galatians 5 where he says we're to keep in step with the Spirit. We're to walk in the Spirit. We're to be led by the Spirit. We're to produce the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. And I know sometimes, and I don't quibble with this, but it's not totally accurate. Sometimes we say, well, deacons are people who do physical things and elders are people who do spiritual things. I don't think that's quite an accurate description in that there's a lot of spiritual things involved in service. We've had a deacon at Eastside Midwest City, I'm not sure, 4 decades or so. He's been in charge of benevolence. And Connie Barney has fed hundreds and hundreds of people. He has served, he has helped, he's just been kind of the hands and the feet of Jesus. And one of the things that we talked about, and we had a food pantry in the back, and physically, and Bill and Claudia will know this very carefully, but Douglas Boulevard is the first exit if you're coming into Oklahoma City. So if you're headed toward California, the east side of Tinkerfield, and we're about 1.5 miles north, and so you can just imagine the traffic that we get in the office if we're the first street in Oklahoma City for people who are headed west. And one of the things that Connie said, he said, when I go back to the pantry, I always try to get named products, Del Monte and other stuff, rather than just name brand. And he said, because I hear Jesus saying, in so much as you did it to who? The least of these, what did you do? You did it unto me. So every time someone came in, like for example, one day we had a guy on a bicycle, and he had 3 doubled plastic bags on the front, and that was his possessions. And he was asking for food, so we got things. He didn't have a can opener, so what can he open? What can he take? But because of being around Connie, every time I went to the pantry, I thought, what are the best things we have in the pantry for this guy riding on a bicycle headed toward New Mexico? And here's someone as a deacon, very much the Spirit of Jesus, in so much as you have done this to the least of these, you have done it unto me. Domestic relationships, we talked about this in more detail last week. It is a husband and one wife, but I still like the original translation. It's a one-woman man. And what we have both with the elders, the bishops, and then with the deacons are people who are family people. We had the term last week, a household manager. In this case, the deacon rules his house and his children well. And then most translations will say his wives are worthy of respect, not a slanderer, temperate and faithful in all things. This is hard to say, and if I hadn't been here for a little while, I wouldn't even say it. Wives can disqualify their husbands from being elders or deacons. That's hard to say. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is a household, this is a family type thing. And I know people, the word deaconess is there, and there are women in the church who serve. I tell people in Churches of Christ, we don't have women deacons, we have church secretaries, and they do much of but they serve in that capacity. That doesn't mean that they're preaching, it doesn't mean that they're leading in prayer. But over the last 50 years, we've been in a couple situations, and Bill, how do you go about talking to a family and say, you've been considered to be this, but your wife disqualifies you from that's just painful. That's hard to do. But this is mom, dad, and the kids. Usually a business, a household is including servants, all the people who are involved. And the other thing, especially with elders and deacons, in many places the church is going to be meeting in their house, their place of business. So when you hear the word household, typically in the first century, it's not just mom and dad and their small kids. This is an extended family unit, and this entire family is going to be either the best or the worst advertisement for the church and the community. And all of these terms are listed and are given very specific qualities. Habits of life, he's not double-tongued or deceitful, and he's not given to much wine. So when you look at the term deacon, there is someone who gets something done at the behest of a superior, someone who takes directions from someone. And look at this statement in John 12:25 beginning. Whoever will love his life will lose it, and whoever will lose his life for my sake will find it. And if anyone serves me, he must follow me, for where I am, there will my servant be also, and anyone who serves me, the Father will honor him. So, a deacon is someone who has been selected by the local church to be involved in specific service, specifically to the Christian community. On the back of the next page, the term is a verb. These are terms that are deacon in terms of the noun. But again, service, to take care of, to wait on. And all of these are terms that are involved in this. And these are men who, again, there's a wide variety of things. It can be everything from relief to the poor. It can be things for the congregation. but they are men who specifically have been set aside to serve and to help others. I want to read a little more from this passage in Mark chapter 10, and here's what's significant. The spirit of Jesus of coming to serve is to kind of permeate and to kind of be a part of all of our relationships. I said this recently in a public lesson, and I know some people didn't get it because it was an agricultural thing, but a guy from Mississippi moved to Los Angeles for years and years. I'm sure he's passed away, but he does a radio program. It's called the Gospel Bus or something. He studies through the Bible every 5 years, and it's on 800. And I just listened to him occasionally, just good Bible studies. But he was talking about this sense of serving one day, and he said, even in marriages, sometimes people, and I think I hear a term from a movie, "She completes me." We're looking for someone who will fulfill me. And he said, how different is it when someone has the Spirit of Christ and they're into a relationship to serve and to give rather than to get? Okay, here comes a Mississippi farm term. He said, I'm doing a wedding and I look out and here are 2 ticks looking for a dog. Some of you won't get it, but just think about it for a second. He said, here are 2 ticks looking for a dog. Both of these people are needy and needing the other person. And how much conflict is there going to be in a marriage when both people are needing the other person to do this and this and this rather than, I come to this relationship to serve? And this Spirit of Jesus, and listen to the broader passage in Mark chapter 10, 42. Jesus called them and said, you know those who are the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and the great ones exercise authority. It shall not be so among you. And here it comes. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And just stop and think. Jesus is the epitome of that. Whoever is great among you must be your servant. Whoever would be first among you must be the slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. And that's why, and we'll say this as we go through, when I think of deacons, in Jesus the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, then the men who are chosen to be deacons are like the attitude, the service of Jesus in the flesh in the congregations where they are in their day and time. Luke 22:26. Let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as the one who serves. For who is the greater, the one who reclines at the table or one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? I am among you as one who serves. The other side of this is, once a person adopts this Spirit of Jesus, and you think there's a joy, there is a deep satisfaction when, like Jesus, we can be of service and help other people. Especially through ladies' class, a lot of you got to know Sheila, and since she's not here, then I can talk about her. We went through a period of time in Australia. We had 4 families. Charlie and Debbie Powell are back at Britton Road on a visit, and Kent and Tony, who is Kyle's dad, got hepatitis C or something, and they were sick boys. They both lost about 15 pounds. They were housebound, shivering and everything. So we had 4 or 5 months where we averaged at least 100 people a month through our house. Ladies' class came to our house. We didn't have a church building. We had a place for Sunday morning, but all the activities through the week came through our house. The Friday night devotional came to our house. If mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. And I know some ladies, if they had 100 people a week come through their house, would just be in a tiz all the time. because nothing is just exactly like it was by the time the next group leaves and the play group leaves and the kids leave and everything. But we look back, and that was just one of the joys of our life, because look at all the people that we were able to serve. And if you know the girl, we can't come to a church fellowship unless we bring at least 3 items in case somebody has forgotten something. And that's what I'm saying about the spirit that's there. Jesus didn't go around clenching his fist and his teeth because he had to serve. There's a spirit of joy, there's a freedom, there's a release in being involved in service, especially in the way that Jesus was. So there are 18 different words for service in the New Testament. Here's an entire lesson. We're just going to do some highlights. If you look under 2:1, right in the middle, a slave is owned. He's the property of his master. One who serves by choice, but he's not property, we're going to call a servant. So a slave is going to be property. A servant is going to be either paid or choosing to do this in a different capacity. And then there's a whole different word for service, like the priests and Levites served in the tabernacle and they served in the temple. And these are 3 of the major terms that's there. When you look at the word slave, it's the word doulos. What is very interesting is that most of the writers of the letters of the New Testament will refer to themselves as a slave of Jesus. And can I use the word property of? And what to some people would have been a term of derision, then there was a great sense of ownership. James, a servant, a slave of Jesus Christ, that's the term for saying, I'm the property of. This is my master. I'm connected to him in that relationship. And this is a term that is then used very much by Christians in different capacities to say, because Jesus is Lord and I choose to follow him, then remember what Paul said to the Corinthians, you are not your own, you have been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. So the spiritual sense of headship and ownership is expressed by that word slave. The second word, though, is the word servant, and this is someone who chooses to do something. And here's what's significant. Jesus never refers to himself as a slave. Every time the word is there, it's a different word. It is a servant, but it's one who chooses to do that. I don't know why the New Testament didn't say that. One possibility is Jesus doesn't belong to anyone. He's deity himself. But how significant. Deity chooses to empty himself, taking the form of a servant, and being found in flesh as the form of a servant, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. So we have a term for property, and that's spiritually the writers, and it's us. We belong to Jesus. And then here's Jesus, and this to me is the parallel for the deacons, the one who chooses to serve in that capacity. And then if you look at the next page, there's one who serves in a sense of worship or service. I want to just, for the time we have left, I just want to notice these descriptions of a deacon. A deacon, this is 1:1 on the back page, is someone who embodies the example of the ministry of Jesus. A deacon is someone who volunteers, and there'll be time away from personal interest and from family in terms of the service that's involved there. Deacons may be entrusted with finances. There's a lot to do with the word diakonos, with someone who is kind of like a steward who oversees the responsibilities and the functions of others. I don't know if this relates to you, but I sometimes think of deacons like a waiter or a waitress in a cafe. You know, a lot of food's in the kitchen, but someone's there who gets back and forth with the order and the food. They choose to serve in that capacity. And in the same way, deacons are involved in the service in a wide range of personal ways to be involved in that. But I think of that again as the Spirit of Jesus alive in the church. I want to go down to the very bottom because we don't have time to finish all the things that are there. I listened to, and I think Mark was probably in his 40s, a young man who finished high school in 3 years, finished university in 3 years, was a very, very bright boy. And his wife came down with what's going to actually be a terminal illness. And they lived, I think, in Kentucky, but she was taken to a doctor in Atlanta. And she had kind of recovered for a while and was getting better. And the doctor said, you know, why don't you go home for a couple of days and kind of catch your breath and, you know, come back and we'll see how she's doing. So he said, I got back home and he said, I was just like in a fog. But when I got home, he says, I don't know who. Someone picked me up from the airport. The grass had been mowed in the yard in our house, and there was food in the refrigerator. And then he said, I'd been home about 4 or 5 hours, and I got a call from the doctor, and he said, I'm really sorry, your wife has died. And he said, when that happens, you're just in this fog because of all this stuff that's going on and all the emotion. And he said again, someone checked on me, someone took me to the airport, and he said there was just a blur for about the next 6 months of all the things that happened. And he said from that, when I hear of people who have a crisis of some kind, he said, I have an acronym, and he said it's BLD. And we've done this in different contexts, but it's so important to redo. I'm sorry, I can remember BLT, okay? So it's close to that, and we're just going to change the last letter. So that's how I can remember this. And he said, every time something takes place and there's an accident, I think of BLD. And he said, the first one is, be there. And he says, your presence says something that words can't say. And one of the things that I think about, and mention this in a different context, do you remember Job's 3 friends? Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar? On my way to visit with a family, accident or death or something, one of the things that I pray is, God, please help me not to be either Eliphaz, Bildad, or Zophar today. You don't have to explain why this happened. You don't have to explain why did God take this, take this child or whatever else. Probably Sheila's dearest friend in Australia had a 2-year-old son that pushed his pram next to the fence of the swimming pool, crawled over, tossed his toy in the pool, and went in and got it and drowned at 2. And Mary said, if anyone tells me that God needs another angel, I'm just going to scream. We don't have to say anything. And see, that to me takes a lot of pressure off of us because I don't have to justify, I don't have to explain. So the B is be there. L, listen. That's all you have to do. If they're not willing to talk, you don't have to talk. Does anybody remember how long Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar were silent? A week. And I think if those guys could keep their mouth shut for a week, I can keep mine shut while I'm here in the house for this particular visit. And we're at a wedding over here close to 50th and Penn when Sheila was teaching. We had the pagers. Pager went off. 3 of our university kids were headed to Six Flags. Late in the day had pulled out in front of an 18-wheeler and it ran over their little car. And we've got 3 kids who are in a life and death situation. They're pulling glass out of them with tweezers because, we possibly could lose 3 of our young people at church. Well, what do you think of when you're on the way? BLD. we're going to be there, we're going to listen. And the D is, if you do that, a lot of times God will provide an opportunity for you to serve those people and that you can do something to serve them. And what's significant to me is that for people who do those things, it's amazing how often God will open a door of opportunity that there's something that you can do. Because their names are different, most of you have figured out that Richard, Dodgen, and Craig are Sheila's brothers. Richard was air traffic controller, supervisor at the air traffic controller for years. And once he came there, when there was, fill in the blank, a sickness or a death, let's pass the hat and let's go either buy some food, let's buy something to take to people. And Richard started that. Terry had the severe illness for a number of months before she passed away. And Richard said, after she'd passed away, there was a knock at the door, and guess what? The people that he had worked with had taken up a collection, and here came some food, and here came some things to help them. And he said, I never thought that they would be giving it back to me. And so all of us at different times will have opportunities to serve. All of us will know people who have some type of crisis, something that takes place, and every time that does, then I think of a really nice BLT sandwich, and I think, okay, we're just going to change the last letter, and I want to be there. I want to listen, and given the opportunity, I want to do something to serve them. One of my closest friends in college, his brother was killed on 63rd Street out here on the other side of Sooner. Came over a hill, the guy was on the wrong side of the road. Hit him head on, never hit his brakes. They met each other at 60 miles an hour, and it just killed Joe at the spot. And his wife was touch and go in the hospital, and I went to visit. And the mom and dad said, Don, will you go help make arrangements for the funeral? And so I just went with him. Well, once Joe was in the casket or everything, because the only thing he had time to do was to do this, but his whole wrist was bruised. And I just thought, some white daisies would fit right there, and Mom at least won't have to see the bruise. And when we stop and think about it, it's not always the big things, but it's the small things that we can do to serve other people. And you think, in a group like this, the Spirit of Jesus, I came not to be served, but to serve. If we adopt that spirit in our lives, God will give us many opportunities in order to fulfill that. We moved to Australia at 26 years of age with a 9-month-old son. And not too long after that, our second daughter is on the way. Sheila's at home, has finally gotten the kids down. And Patricia Busman came, and she had 2 buckets, had her hair up, and something else. And she said, "Good day. I'm Sadie, the cleaning lady, and you will go to bed, and I will take care of your bathroom and your kitchen floors while you're having a nap." And so if you've got small kids and you're expecting to have a lady show up with mop and cleaner and disinfectant, and she put Sheila to bed, put the cake for afternoon tea on the counter, and got down on her hands and knees, and with a toothbrush and a small brush, then she completely disinfected the bathroom and the kitchen floor. She put the kettle on, had a cup of tea made. "Sweetheart, it's time for afternoon tea." And they have a cup of afternoon tea and some cake that she brought. And can you imagine coming in and your whole usable part of your house has been disinfected and clean, and all she said was, "Sadie, the cleaning lady, needs to leave now." If it comes a point where an older woman needs to speak to a younger woman, it's easier for her to say that if she has that kind of relationship with her. But can you ever repay someone? Here you are halfway around the world by yourself, and about once every 6 weeks or so, "Hello, I'm Sadie, the cleaning lady. Will you please go to bed while I clean your house?" And you just stop and think, all of us in different ways have the opportunity to adopt the Spirit of Jesus in that sense. So deacons are a part of God's eternal plan. It's a part of the Spirit and the ministry of Jesus. And here's our last thought. There are two words that describe the citizens of heaven. 13 times the word saint is used. We're called saints all through the book of Revelation. And the other one is servants. 14 times the word servant is used. And look at those last two verses and we're done. Revelation 7 and 15. They will be before the throne of God, and they will serve him day and night in his temple. There will be no curse. The servants will serve him, and we will see his face. So here's what I think of. Serving is a keynote of the ministry of Jesus. Deacons are the word flesh. They serve in the congregation. And serving God will be the privilege of the saints and the citizens of heaven through all eternity.